Good afternoon, everybody. This is Mark Fitzpatrick, Tiger Club of Kansas City, and welcome you to our Zoom call for Tuesday, March 15th. We look forward today to talking with Sam McDowell, sports columnist for the Kansas City Star. Before we get to Sam, let's get some updates on Mizzou sports. 9 Missouri wrestlers, including 3 seated in the top 10 of their respective weight categories, head to the NCAA championships this weekend in Detroit. Of course, the Tigers were Big 12 champions, and Coach Brian Smith was named the conference's Coach of the Year. 11th ranked gymnastics team will compete in the SEC championships on Saturday in Birmingham. Women's basketball plays in the WNIT. They will host Drake at 7 p.m. Thursday in Mizzou Arena. And the spring football game is at 1 p.m. this Saturday on Faurot Field. That game will be streamed live on the SEC Plus network and replayed at 7 o'clock Sunday on the regular SEC network. Registration is now open for the Tiger Club's 2022 golf tournament. You can do it online at kctigerclub.com. Again, we'll be playing at the newly rehabbed and beautiful Oakwood Country Club in South Kansas City. So make sure you get your registration in before it fills up. Also want to encourage you to attend the Tiger Ball hosted by the Kansas City chapter of the Mizzou Alumni Association. That will be April 9th. For information on that, you go to MizzouKC.com. Thanks to Darren, as always, for hosting our call, and our speakers committee headed by Paul Blackman for lining up these outstanding speakers every week. And we have a great one today, Sam McDowell from the Kansas City Star. Sam's a 2007 graduate of the Mizzou J-School. He joined the Star in 2012. He has covered high schools. He covered Sporting KC, most recently the Kansas City Chiefs. And as of a month ago, he became a columnist for the paper. Sam, welcome. Great to have you here. Congratulations on your, promotion to becoming the columnist, and you're doing a great job.
Thanks, Mark. I need to have you follow me around and introduce me to everywhere I go here if I get that kind of introduction.
Well, for a small fee, we could arrange that. So I get paid so much for this too. So, hey, let's jump right into the topic at hand, the Mizzou coaching search. Of course, Conzo Martin was let go on Friday evening. There's a lot of names being thrown out there. I'm sure you're going to tell us today who's going to get the job.
Right. Yeah, that's why I'm here to announce the next guy. I think it's interesting. I think when you look at Desiree's history, there's an indication that she prefers a younger coach, and I think that makes sense for Mizzou. I think you've got to outline what your goals are as the program first, whether or not it's to bring the energy back, to the arena, whether or not it's to win right away, whether or not you're looking at the long haul. And because I think those questions can lead you in different places. And I think her history shows that she more looks at the long-term outlook, that it might not be. And I realize with NCAA basketball, the transfer portal has completely changed the game as far as how quickly you can turn one season to the next. But I think that she's going to be more inclined to look at somebody who's going to be there for a lot longer than a few years. And therefore, maybe it's not next year that we see this thing turned around. Maybe it's in 3 or 4 years that we see this team that's getting back to a perennial contender for the NCAA tournament. I think that has to be the goal. So with that in mind, I do think it's going to be somebody who's more in that, 38 to 45-year-old range. I know one name that's been thrown around all these coaching searches is Jerome Tang with Baylor, but I think I see her going more to somebody that's got some head coaching experiences and that is a little bit younger. I think McClaskton at North Texas is a really interesting name, a guy that's been in the region. And I think I would want somebody who's got some head coaching experiences based on the job that they're taking over at Mizzou.
One name I do want to ask you about is Kim English.
Sure.
And he's obviously being a Mizzou player, was very popular. He had sort of an up and down season at George Mason. It's only his first year. My first reaction with him was, well, he's a work in progress, may not be ready yet. But if he had just been an assistant at Tennessee this year, would he be somebody that the Tigers would want to get? Do you think he's a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to make that call regardless. Even if right now your thinking is that you want to have somebody who's got more head coaching experiences, I think you have to make the call regardless, because those boxes I just mentioned that you're trying to check, he does bring energy and back into your program. I think he brings some excitement. I think he would bring some fans back into Mizzou Arena again. And so if that is up on your list of priorities, and it absolutely has to be in your top three, if it's number one, I can't imagine a guy that's going to bring more excitement to your program immediately in year one than Kim English would. You have to decide, and you've got to talk to the right people who know the intricacies of basketball to ask, this is a guy I'm interested in. Is he ready at this level yet? And that's something that I think you, like I said, you've got to seek some input from some people who really know the game of basketball to determine.
Well, and Tennessee had a great season this year, and my understanding he was responsible for recruiting some of those guys. And I understand he's got a pretty good recruiting class coming in this year at George Mason.
And he's also, I think we've seen that he's willing to embrace the transfer portal. And like I mentioned before, I mean, that is where we are in college basketball now, to where whether you like it or not, that's part of the game. And you've got to participate, because when you don't, we see what happens. And so, I think that the fact he's shown a willingness to do that in year one, we'll see what he does this year if he stays at George Mason. I mean, those things are in the works already. But I think that, he's the type of guy that's shown a willingness to explore every avenue towards getting the right guys on his roster.
There's some other big time jobs open this year: Louisville, Maryland, now Florida, Kansas State. Is Missouri a good job? Is it an attractive position right now? You've got a fan base that's pretty apathetic, I have to say, and it's tough for people from St. Louis and Kansas City to drive to Columbia for midweek games when you can watch everything on TV. How's the Mizzou job rated, do you think?
So I was actually looking this up just because I sort of had posed that question to myself. Ken Palm has a really interesting ranking system of head coaching vacancies where they, or where he, I should say, sort of compiles data all the way back from 1997 and looks at the history of the program from there forward, giving more weight to what you've done recently. And they rank Mizzou at the 51st best job in the country, which is slightly ahead of Kansas State. I think K-State's about 57th or so. I think that feels a little bit low, purely because I think there's a lot of talent in St. Louis. There's some talent in Kansas City as well, but I think there's enough talent in St. Louis, and not really, right now the St. Louis kids are going, they're scattered anywhere and everywhere. It's not like you're losing them all to Illinois, or like you're losing a lot of the KC kids. You are losing those to KU. But when you've got so much talent in St. Louis, even beyond the Jason Tatums of the world, we saw Tyler Cook a few years ago go to Iowa. That's a kid who I think, if you've got the right coach at Mizzou, could be playing here. So I think it's a better job than people think it is because of the talent in St. Louis. I do think they've shown a history that the fans will show up if you do win. But yeah, you've got to have somebody that's willing to play the long game, like I mentioned before, because I don't know that we're going to see Mizzou Arena packed next year based on who the new coach is. I think you're going to have to prove that you can win first.
You wrote a really interesting column, I thought, during the tournament last week about Ochai Agbaji, and you covered him, I understand, in high school some,
Yeah.
and you said, I don't understand why people aren't recruiting this kid. And he wasn't even on anybody's radar. Mizzou missed out on him, no question. Now he's one of the best players in the country.
Yeah, so I first bumped into Ochai Agbaji, or watched him as a junior at his district tournament. It was actually his last game of the season because Oak Park lost. Oak Park is not a perennial contender of a basketball program up until that point. And I was sitting next to a coach who was scouting because his team was playing the winner of who Ochai was playing, which I think was Park Hill at that time. And I turned to him and I said, who is this number 30? He's incredible. And, what's remarkable about Ochai flying under the radar is that he's got the skills that should pop. I mean, he's athletic, he's smooth, he's got a good shot. And he had all that in high school. He averaged 23 points a game in high school as a junior. And so his senior year comes around and I watch him play at the William Jewell tournament, which is, before Christmas or right after Christmas. So the first semester, And he was the best player I saw of the 12 teams I saw that weekend, and by a long shot too. And so every coach that was, I kept saying, why isn't Mizzou and K-State in on this kid? Those are the schools. This is the type of kid that they should be targeting. And so I went out to Oak Park a week later and I asked him, I said, have you talked to Mizzou and K-State? And he just shook his head and said no. And I think that step one of being in this job, whoever is going to get it, is just identifying the talent. And maybe it's because we're so close to the court in basketball as compared to football, or maybe it's because I feel like I know the sport better than I might know the responsibilities of like an offensive lineman on every play. But I don't think that judging a talent in a high school basketball game is all that difficult. And to miss on that kid, I feel like is inexcusable, especially in this day and age when highlights are available on Huddle. All these kids post this stuff online. And I realize you have to be just overwhelmed with the amount of clips that you're receiving all the time. But part of your job is to look at it. And this is a kid that I just don't feel like Mizzou and I know we're talking about Mizzou, but I throw K-State in there too, because if you had gotten in on him early as a junior and built that relationship before KU's allowed to swoop in late, I think you would have had the chance to get him.
He's a great player. I do want to say, I'm sorry what happened with Konzo. We saw it coming, but he was always gracious with the club with his time. He's never any question that he was going to get Mizzou into any trouble. High integrity guy and great story. And we certainly appreciate what he gave us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mark, you said it better than I could, I think. And the other columnist on staff, Vahe Gregorian, has covered Konzo since he was a high school player outside of St. Louis when Vahe was at the Post-Dispatch. And just for the longest time has had wonderful things to say about Konzo. But that sort of illustrates the dilemma of college basketball right now. I think that the programs who are consistently great operate in that gray area for the most part. And Konzo did not. And I think, that's part of the reason that Mizzou is where it is right now. And it is a moral dilemma as far as what's the right thing to do. How do you go about this? Now, the NIL stuff sort of opens it up in a different avenue. And I think there were some advantages there that maybe weren't being taken advantage of with Mizzou that the new coach will have to explore. Like I said, how to take advantage of the NIL stuff that sort of opens up, for these kids to get paid in a different way.
Talking with Sam McDowell, the Kansas City Star. If you'd like to ask him a question, please use the chat feature at the bottom of the page. Sam, I want to talk about the NCAA tournament a little bit. I heard you on Seren yesterday. You don't do pools since your wife won one year just because Kemba Walker was cute or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I was hoping my wife beating me in the pool would come across here. I don't do the NCAA pools anymore. But I think there was one year, it was about 10 years ago, or maybe it's probably been longer than that, maybe 10, 12 years ago, when Kemba Walker led UConn to the tournament. And my wife picked him to win it all. I think they were a 3 seed. And they'd finished 9th in the Big East that year. And she just thought Kemba Walker looked like he could star in a Disney movie. And that was her reasoning for picking him. Won our pool. And so I decided that should probably be it for me for competing even against my own wife in the pool.
So who do you like this year?
I think Gonzaga is obviously going to be tough to beat. I mean, the NCAA tournament, part of the reasons it's fantastic is because the best team so rarely wins. I mean, you've always got the excitement of that aspect of it, but I still think Gonzaga, just when you look at how great their offense is, and they're pretty good defensively too. I just think that they're going to be too efficient. And I don't see what's different. Last year though, I thought, you thought all year, hey, Gonzaga and Baylor just clear away the best teams. And then we got to see it. And I still think Gonzaga is right there, but there's not another team that I think can match them right now.
A team that, and just maybe I'm just because I watched them last weekend, and you and Seren talked about this yesterday. Teams that play great defense tend to do better in the tournament. Texas Tech is #1 in the country in defensive efficiency.
Yeah.
They tend to go into offensive slumps, but I would think they would be a really tough out if you had to face them.
I'm actually wondering about the entire Big 12 for that reason. I mean, when you look at all of the teams in the Big 12 that made it, they're all really good defensively. And so I'm interested to see how the conference as a whole fares. But yeah, Texas Tech is a team that has size at every position, and an era in which a lot of teams are playing small. And it's not just that they're tall; they're really long. And so they can be difficult to get a good shot against because, and obviously, they still have the Chris Beard mechanisms, the way they play defense. That I do think Texas Tech could be a tough out. Of course, it all depends on their matchups and stuff like that as we progress.
Should be an interesting tournament. I want to talk to you about the Chiefs move. Before we do that, talk a little about the change in your role. You were covering the Chiefs all year and did a great job. Now you're the columnist. Talk about your matriculation into your new role.
Yeah, it's definitely the most different thing I've done in my career. I graduated like you mentioned from Mizzou in 2007, so I guess it's been almost 15 years now. And every job I had, I could translate all of my previous skills to that new job. And what's a little bit different now is maybe half or 70% of what I was doing on the Chiefs translates to what I'm doing now because I'm trying to write with more opinion, more voice, and that's just a new territory for me. And following Sam Mellinger is obviously very difficult. He's just long been one of my mentors, and I think one of the best columnists in the country. And I don't know if Kansas City people realize that because they don't probably read what's going on in Indianapolis and stuff like that. So but yeah, it's completely different. I've enjoyed it so far because it has allowed me to, I love covering the Chiefs because the NFL is just so popular. But I miss covering college basketball. I miss covering the Royals, and so that all that stuff gets brought back into the picture now.
Well, the Stars had a long history of great columnists, and I'm sure you're going to do very well. And I've really enjoyed reading your stuff so far.
Appreciate that.
Um, you wrote a column the other day about the Chiefs free agents. Who should they let go? Who should they try to keep? So a lot of activity yesterday. Chiefs signed Justin Reed from the Texans. I guess that means Tyron Matthews gone. Do you think?
So I was told probably, not necessarily, but probably. So yeah, I think Tyron is likely gone, and something I'm actually working on as soon as we get off this call. I think it signals sort of a change in philosophy from this front office compared to the one it took over for. One of the things that got John Dorsey in trouble were contracts he gave out to current players, rewarding past performance and expecting that same performance with the new contract. So you look at, Tom Ali, Justin Houston, Eric Berry, that they were paid what they had already earned versus maybe what they were going to earn in the future. And those three contracts put the Chiefs in a really bad salary cap situation. Not this last season, but just the season before, Eric Berry was getting paid $8 million still against the cap. So I think you're seeing a GM now that doesn't want to get tied into a potentially bad contract. And if that means cutting a guy or cutting bait with a guy a year early, I think you'd rather do that than wait a year too late.
How do you compare Reed with Tyron? He's younger, looks to be a solid tackler. Went to Stanford, so he's pretty smart. Does he bring the same skills and leadership ability that Tyron did?
So I've got a friend that covers the Houston Texans, and he raves about what Justin Reed's like in the locker room. And a lot of the stuff he said, in fact, I replied to him. I said, it sounds like you're describing the guy that they're losing, because there's nobody better to talk to in the Chiefs locker room than Tyron Matthew. Now, of course, we haven't had open locker room in a couple of years now because of COVID. But Tyron Matthew was always the guy that would make time for the extra few questions off to the side with you, and just I can't say enough good things about just the kind of person he is. Justin Reed also got, like Tyron Matthew this last year, he was the Texans nomination for the Walter Payton Man of the Year award for all the work he does in the Houston community. So it sounds like personality, they're getting a kind of a similar player. Now leadership, I think that stuff is going to be interesting to see, because when Tyron Matthew came to Kansas City, they knew they had to overhaul the attitude of that defense. And what can be difficult is hearing a new voice be the loudest voice in the room. And it was not for Tyron Matthew because they knew they needed a new voice. Here, you do still have some veterans that are being left, that are still on the team. When you look at Chris Jones, you look at Frank Clark is coming back. You've got some veterans in that room, and it'll be interesting to see whether Reed is comfortable enough right off the bat to take on that leadership role that Tyron's vacating.
Chiefs also restructured Frank Clark. Were you surprised at that? And can you explain under the cap what the benefits are to the team?
I wasn't surprised just because I had talked to some people that they indicated this is the way they were going to at least attempt to go. It was just about whether Frank Clark was on board. So, 2 weeks ago at the combine in Indianapolis, they had presented Frank Clark with, here's what we can afford to pay you. We all knew that he was going to eat up a large chunk of the salary cap, even if they had cut him. So the Chiefs' operation was, if we cut Frank Clark, we've got to sign somebody else. And this is the number that it would probably cost us to sign somebody that we think will provide Frank Clark's production, whatever you deem that production is. So they get to that number and they said, well, why don't we just offer Frank Clark that and see if he'll take it? And so the difference between what they're paying Frank Clark in year one compared to what they would have had to pay him or what he would have charged against the cap is only a couple $1 million. And so therefore, I know that people would like to move on from Frank Clark, but for the money you're paying him, that's good value. As long as the next piece of it comes still, which is you still look for the draft, you still look through free agency to improve that position. And they absolutely will. I mean, they do view that position as the primary one that they need to upgrade this offseason.
Any chance Melvin Ingram's back?
I think Melvin Ingram has to first decide if he's for sure going to play football next year. I think the Chiefs a month ago thought that he was kind of on the fence about retirement. So if he does play, I actually do think it will be most likely here in Kansas City.
I want to ask you about Nick Bolton. There's a lot of Nick Bolton fans on this call or on this view. I thought he had a great season. I remember watching playoff game, and they would bring him off the field during passing downs, put in Ben Neiman. Was Nick not fast enough, or was it just that Spagnuolo wanted more experience?
A combination of both. I mean, that was always the knock on him in college too, right? I mean, coverage wasn't his strength. But what was interesting to see is he really improved there throughout the season. And the best example was the Chargers, when they played in Kansas City in the first month of the season, picked on Nick Bolton consistently in coverage. That was when Willie Gay was out. So Nick Bolton had to play a lot higher percentage of the snaps. He played again in LA. Willie Gay missed that game because of COVID. So he again has to play almost the full allotment of snaps. And the Chargers tried to pick on him again, and it didn't work. I mean, I think he was targeted like 7 times, only 3 completions. And so he grew a lot in that area. I did not think that his snap count reflected that growth. I thought he should have been playing more. And now that Hitchens is gone, and we'll see if Ben Neiman's back, I could see them bringing him back potentially on a one-year deal. But Nick Bolton's got to be your guy. I mean, he's showed a comfort level in calling plays in the 2 games that Anthony Hitchens missed. The game that the Chiefs were worst in was Nashville, and I thought Nick Bolton was the best player on the field for the Chiefs. Like I said, not setting a huge bar considering how bad the Chiefs were in that game. But I thought that based on the way he played in that game, he proved that he belonged on the field more consistently, and to not see him get those more consistent snaps out afterwards was pretty disappointing.
I hate to keep rehashing the loss to the Bengals, but I want to get your thoughts on it. In my 55 years of being a Chiefs fan, it may have been the most agonizing playoff loss, and that's a pretty high bar. What happened the second half, in your opinion?
The Bengals obviously changed some things defensively as far as the way that they dropped an extra man in coverage. They put this sort of wall up front to prevent Patrick Mahomes from scrambling out of the pocket. They were more concerned about, a lot of teams will have a linebacker as a quarterback spy. They use one of their defensive linemen that said, you can't get around the edge. You can't get up the middle here. I also thought that Patrick Mahomes had the worst half I've seen him play. And so you look and you say, what are the reasons why? And to me, the game changed. I know a lot of people reference the end of that first half. I thought it changed on the first drive of the second half. Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce dropped passes on back-to-back plays. And I think you saw all season, Patrick Mahomes became the worst version of himself after his receivers couldn't hang on to the football. And Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce were two of the highest guys in the NFL, both top 5 in the NFL in terms of the impact of their drop passes this year. And I think that weighed on Patrick Mahomes, and that was the worst possible time to have back-to-back drops. When you go back and watch the film, he's got open receivers at times, particularly in the last drive of regulation when they're trying to win the game rather than tie the game. He's got open receivers. He had Byron Pringle open. He had McCole Hardman open on the third down play. Both times he doesn't throw it. And I think the reason he didn't throw it is because of how poorly things had gone in the first drive of that second half, whenever his receivers dropped back-to-back balls.
Very interesting analysis. I agree. That was the worst half I'd seen him play. I think it was worse than even the Tennessee game. But a couple other names, Charvarius Ward, you predicted would be gone. I think just the price tag too high.
Yeah, and they've got a history there with Steve Spagnuolo and Brett Veach. The combination of those two, they've been able to find cornerbacks cheap, whether that's the back end of the draft or whether that's with cheaper free agents. Like we saw Bashaud Breeland here for a couple of years have pretty good years. He goes to Minnesota and he gets cut before the year's up, and so. LeJarius Sneed, 4th round pick, Rashad Fenton, 6th round pick. Both those guys have performed well in Spagnuolo's system. So I think they feel like they can get that labor for cheaper than what Charvarius Ward is, which is an interesting dynamic because the rest of the NFL goes the opposite. They all think you have to invest all your resources in your secondary, particularly your cornerbacks. But the Chiefs have gotten by with doing the opposite, and I think that they think their track record indicates that they could do the same again.
You see Lucas Niang being back this year? Pretty serious injury, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk to medical professionals, even guys that have been in the league before, they feel like they've seen that injury be career ending. The guys have never really come back the same from it. So they're going to look for a right tackle. I mean, they're not going into the season saying, "Hey, Lucas is going to be fine by week 1. He's going to be our guy." They feel like they have to improve that position because it's just a complete question mark of how he bounces back from it once he gets back on the field.
In your opinion, then, where do you think the Chiefs go in the draft?
It would really surprise me if it was not defense, and it would really surprise me if it was not the defensive line. I think that, you've got Chris Jones at defensive tackle, but I still think you could use another body there. I don't think Derek Nottie is back, even though I think he should be back. So that's another reason that you've got to have a defensive tackle, and you still have to have your edge rushers. I think, everything on the back end becomes significantly easier the shorter the time the quarterback has to throw. And that's the times where we saw the Chiefs in trouble this year, is especially, I mean, you look at Joe Burrow in the AFC Championship game. He was sacked 16 times in the 2 games that sandwiched that AFC Championship game, sacked once in that game. I just think everything changes in the equation if you can pressure the quarterback. And whatever they do in the first round, it has to be a guy that can do that.
Let's talk a little about the Royals. Fortunately, we ended this lockout, and the Royal, a lot of activity on the free agent market and trades in the last few days. Royals have not been active, but it seems like they got a pretty solid lineup. Are they good enough to contend to one of the expanded playoff spots?
Yeah, I was interested to see how much the playoffs would expand, because I felt like if there were 7 teams from the AL, that they could be in the mix there, especially because when you consider you've got 4 or 5 teams that are basically not even playing for this year. So it would have been basically 7 out of 11. You got to be one of the 7 best. Now it's 6. It changes it a little bit, but I still. I'll be disappointed if we're at the All-Star break and we're not talking about, hey, what moves could they make to ensure that they're in the playoffs? If we're talking about next year already, by the time the All-Star break rolls around, it's all going to come down to me. You mentioned the lineup, and that I think that's more of a sure thing than the starting pitching. And you've got so many young arms there. You don't need them all to come through this year. You've got to have a couple of those guys take a step forward, whether it's Lynch, whether it's Singer, a couple of those, Bubich, somebody in that rotation that you're not counting on being a number 2 and number 3 has to step up and be a number 2 or number 3.
It looks like Whit Merrifield might move to the outfield with the caveat that Mondesi has to be healthy. Is that going to happen, you think, if Mondesi's healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the sort of undercurrent of the Royal season is what can you get out of Mondesi, and what are you counting on going into the season getting out of him? Um, I think it's interesting that they seem to be trending toward moving Nicky Lopez back to second base. And I think if Nicky Lopez is in your lineup, he's in the lineup because of his glove, not because of his bat. And I realize he hit 300 last year, and his glove is most valuable at shortstop. So I think, I mean, he was the best defensive shortstop. He was actually the best defensive player by one metric, regardless of position last year. So I think I would keep Nicky Lopez at shortstop. I don't think that's what they'll do. I think they'll put him at second base, and I think they'll try and roll with Mondesi again at shortstop, which means if Bobby Witt makes the team, it's probably going to be as a third baseman.
It looks like he will, don't you think? Whit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's time, right? I mean, I think he's done. He did all he could do last year to prove that this time is his. And we've seen the Royals give guys shot right out of the gate. They don't have to, sort of fudge the service time the way it was before this last CBA. I mean, obviously, one of the major sticking points with the players. If they feel a guy's ready, they feel a guy's ready. And I think he showed last year everything he could possibly do at AAA.
At first base, they have a lot of money tied up in Carlos Santana. I've always been a big fan of his, but he was awful the second half of the season last year.
Yeah.
I doubt they can move him with that contract. What do you see happening there at Nick Prado waiting in the wings?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think when you do tie that type of money up to somebody, you probably give them more than just a year to experiment. So I think that Santana is still going to be given every shot to be in the top half of their lineup. They liked him because he got on base. It was always a little bit of an unusual fit for the Royals because we saw that they weren't a team that does what Santana does, which is consistently work the count and work the count and work the count to try and get on base more than hit his way on base. So now we've seen a little bit of shift in philosophy in that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Santana's one of the guys that if he's going to be in your lineup, he's got to be consistently better than what he was in the second half.
Will you be able to get down to spring training since it's kind of condensed right now?
Yeah, I've got a weird schedule coming up. So I'm flying to Fort Worth on Thursday and gonna catch the KU games on Thursday and Saturday. Then I am flying straight from there on Sunday to Arizona, and then I will fly from Arizona to Chicago if KU advances there, and then I'll fly home. So it's a busy March.
Well, it happens when you're a big time columnist now.
It's one of the perks of the job, right? I mean, first of all, going to the Dallas area in Arizona wouldn't be bad anyway, but going like when the weather's not so hot in Kansas City is even better.
What was your opinion on the CBA with baseball? Who got the best side of the deal?
So I actually sort of looked at it from a third angle and thought, what do the fans get out of this? Because to me, the problem that baseball's had for a long time wasn't really corrected there, which is the parity of the league. You look at the last 20-25 years, really the only small market team that's won a World Series has been the one here in Kansas City. And I think baseball needed to do something to address that. We talk about the Chiefs. I mean, the reason a guy like Patrick Mahomes signs a 10-year contract in Kansas City rather than having to go to LA or Dallas or New York is because they have a salary cap. The Chiefs can offer him every bit as much as another team could offer him. And it's just not been the case in baseball. And I would have liked, and I know the players don't like that. They wanted the luxury tax to increase and increase and increase to allow them to earn more and more and more money. But I just wondered if they might have been able to get, to make up for that elsewhere, whether it's getting paid more earlier in their careers, which was something else they were striving for. I just would have liked to seen baseball as a whole realize that that's what's going to be best for the league.
I didn't understand. I feel like people in baseball are a bit myopic The game's too slow, and I'm a huge fan. Okay, I watched almost every Royals game. The game's too slow. The TV ratings are pale compared to the NBA and the NFL, and they're not connecting with younger fans. That why would they go through this when there seems to be enough money around for everybody?
So I grew up playing baseball. I mean, I spent all my summers playing baseball. And I watch a ton of it. It's rare that on a summer night I don't have a split screen on my TV and I just have two random games on just because I love the game. But there has been so much action taken out of the game. I think the shift takes a ton of action out of the game. I don't personally enjoy watching a left-hander just rip a ball to the right side and it's just right at somebody. I think the defensive plays of the game we're seeing fewer and fewer because of the alignment of it. Obviously there's more walks, there's more strikeouts, there's more home runs, but the ball is put in play at a lower rate than before, and it takes the pitcher too long to deliver a pitch. The batter stepping out every time. So I think I put it in an article, but I think it's 4 minutes on average between times that the ball is actually put in play. And basketball is a continuous game. Hockey, the puck is continuously in play. Football, the ball's in play every snap, and baseball can't figure that aspect out. And so I do now that in this new CBA that the owners have some liberties to take, and they're going to experiment some things over the next couple of years, I think. But I know that everybody wants to see the game they used to see, but at some point you have to worry about how few people are seeing it.
Talking with Sam McDowell, Kansas City Star. If you'd like to ask Sam a question, please use the chat feature. Sam, before we get to some questions from our viewers, any columns upcoming you can tell us about?
Well, I do have the one on that I referenced earlier on Tyron Matthew, and just the shift in this front office regime compared to the one before it. Other than that, I'll be covering KU, and I'm interested to get down to Arizona because part of the newness of this job is just trying to get your feet wet on all these other beats. So I feel like I know the Chiefs pretty well, and it's their off season. And so these other teams are getting ready to be in season, particularly with the Chiefs or with the Royals. So I'm kind of like an open book right now on some of these other beats, and particularly with the Royals whenever I get down there. But I'll certainly have some Royal stuff coming up.
All right, some questions from our viewers. First of all, let's see. Is there any truth that Ochai Agbaji was in fact a Mizzou fan growing up?
He was a fan of, I think it was Wisconsin growing up. So his parents both played at, I think it's Wisconsin, Milwaukee. And so I think he was actually a Wisconsin Badgers fan growing up. He was not a Mizzou or KU fan.
Okay. Is Allen Robinson your top free agent target this offseason, or is a guy like Cedaria Smith more important to the roster? And can the Chiefs afford either of them?
So I like that question because those are probably 1A and 1B for me. I considered Allen Robinson my top target, and then Smith got cut on Monday. So I think he might be more valuable to their needs. But this isn't the way the Chiefs are approaching this offseason. But for me, I think I'd look at my offense and I say I have the opportunity to have the very best offense in the NFL. They've fallen to like fourth or fifth these past couple of years, and I would say if I can be the best at any unit in the NFL, I'm going to go all in on that. And so I realize that they need to address the defense, but I think that the offense has been stale last year, particularly. And that Allen Robinson brings the exact type of dynamic that Patrick Mahomes has never had here, which is a guy that you can throw the ball to in traffic and know he's still going to catch it. And I think some people thought that that's not his preference to play with those guys. We've never seen him play with that guy. He did at Texas Tech when you go back and watch his film. And even if you've got the time to go back and watch him in high school, he throws the ball up to receivers a lot when he's got confidence and then making a plays there. And Allen Robinson's a guy that can do that.
You saw a pretty good quarterback while you were at Mizzou. Just saw that he is back for another year at the Chargers. Surely you saw a 14-year career for him while you both were in school, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. He was pretty generously listed at 6 foot because I remember he came out of a class whenever I'd go into one, 1 or 2 days a week. And I'm 5'11", and I'm pretty sure that Chase Daniel did not have an inch on me whenever I was at Mizzou. So maybe he grew once he was in the NFL. But yeah, I mean, but what a fun team to watch, right? Now I covered the basketball team when I was there at the Missourian, which was Mike Anderson's first year, which actually was also, even though they did not make the tournament, it was a really interesting year to cover. So I just just the dynamic and shift and change and the way that they played, and Mike trying to implement that 40 minutes of hell style. It was just a lot of fun to watch that team play too.
As an aside, has anybody done analysis that Chase made more money per snap than any player in NFL history?
I think it's over 150 grand now per snap, per pass.
Per pass, yeah.
He started like 5 games ever. And what's he up to? Over 100 million now?
Oh yeah, it's well into the 9 figures, I think. But I think that says something about his leadership ability, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him become a coach down the road.
He was a great guy. Now I wasn't covering the Chiefs full time when he was here, but I'd go to their home games still and just help out with the game coverage. And fantastic guy in the locker room. So I felt like every year that he's a free agent, which is almost every year now, that I was always hoping that because the Chiefs always do that too, just 1 year deal with Chad Henne, 1 year deal, 1 year deal. And I've always hoped that I wouldn't mind seeing Chase come back purely for the selfish interest of he's the good quote.
You talked a little about your basketball covering at Mizzou. Next question: what are some of your favorite memories of covering Mizzou athletics when you were a student?
I think the most entertaining game I covered was when so what was interesting about that season was it goes into the dynamic of what's going on now with whoever's going to be the new coach. Is they started, I think it was 8-0 that year, and Arkansas came to town, and Arkansas was supposed to be pretty good. And a winter storm came, and they thought for once they were going to fill up Mizzou Arena because they had not filled it up yet. I think they hadn't drawn more than about 7,000 or 8,000, and then all of a sudden there's a winter storm that hits. But there was a game about midway through the season. I mean, of course, they sold out the KU game, but they got beat by 20 in that game, and they sold out a game against Texas Tech midway through the year, and Texas Tech was ranked. And they blitzed Texas Tech that game. And I felt like they had really turned a corner just within the Big 12 whenever they won that game. But the post game was really entertaining because Bobby Knight was coaching Texas Tech, and he was really unhappy with every question that was asked. And so he eventually actually got up and left the press conference before it was over because he got so pissed off at a question. So that's on YouTube if you're interested in watching it, and it's pretty good watching.
It wasn't your question, was it? Or?
It was not. I was the college kid who was afraid to speak up, and I even asked a question, I think, at that point, because the first 2 had gone so poorly. The Post Dispatch, and then it was Mike DeArmond from the Kansas City Star that he railed on a couple of questions, and I was like, oh, I don't need to raise my hand for this one.
That's great. Do you have any interest in stirring the pot for T-Mobile Center getting an NBA or NHL team?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love them both, but I don't know that we have. When I the NHL thing has been talked about for a while as well. I wonder at what point do we have enough of the kids playing the sport to have the interest in it, and have the churn of the generation to generation stuff there. I love the NHL. I've long been a Blues fan because my dad was a Blues fan. It's the closest team to Kansas City, and I still watch 50 Blues games a year probably. The NBA I think is particularly interesting because I think there's enough interest here to justify it. So obviously the interest has to come from the other end too, right, with the NBA. But I think either one of them, I think would just be awesome to have here, particularly for a columnist who's looking for more to write about.
Kathy Nelson joined us a few weeks ago, and she said the NBA interest was stronger than the NHL. I too follow the Blues, not quite as much as you do, but I went to a game a few weeks ago over there, and there's nothing better in person than NHL
It's
hockey.
it's the biggest difference of a sport between watching it on TV in person, I think.
Exactly.
You can appreciate the speed of the game in person. You appreciate the fact that the game it so rarely stops. I think, we talked about MLB. NHL has a few things figured out in that realm. They cut back on their commercial breaks because they felt like the games were taking too long. They cut out on a couple of the whistles with two line passes and things like that a while back because they felt like that was slowing down the game. They made adjustments that they thought would improve their game and improve the speed of the game. And so, that's one of the lessons that I think MLB can take there.
And I never played. I can hardly stand on a pair of skates, but I just love to watch it. So, what are your thoughts about downtown stadium?
I would personally be for it, and I know that our former columnist here that's now working for the Royals is a big proponent of the downtown stadium. One of the reasons I'm for it, though, is part of this job is you go into other downtowns, and they almost all have their stadiums down there, and you see the impact it has there. It's rare. I think the White Sox is probably the one exception to this. It's rare that you see a stadium that's just barren around it, that there's nothing around it, not much to do. I mean, there's energy and life around all these stadiums. And I just think it'd be really cool to have that, especially as a kid who grew up here in Kansas City when there wasn't a whole lot to do downtown. I mean, it was before T-Mobile Center, it was before Power and Light, it was before all of that. So it's already been cool to see the growth in downtown Kansas City, but I just think a stadium brings a whole nother dimension to it.
I fully agree, and I've attended a lot of stadiums in other cities, and I'm definitely in favor. I hope it happens. Best spot in Columbia you frequently visited while a student at Mizzou?
Well, when you work at the Missourian, Shakespeare's is right next door. So I had this routine in the afternoon after one class, which was 3 days a week, by the way, where I would call in my order at Shakespeare's, go over and pick it up and bring it back and eat there. It's still, I think, the best pizza I've ever had. But I mean, Fieldhouse was a popular spot for us on Fridays and Saturdays, and I loved Columbia. I mean, I'll say that I had visited since I grew up in Kansas City. I didn't really have at that time a preference for a basketball team, and I ended up going to Mizzou because I felt like their education was the best for journalism. They obviously offered in-state tuition for me as well. But I thought that, I really liked Lawrence and Columbia. Those were kind of the two schools I was considering. And Columbia surprised me by the time I got used to it. I just thought it was a great city, and I loved living there for a while.
Sam, we really appreciate your time today. You're doing a great job, and we look forward to reading you in the coming weeks. Sam McDowell, the columnist with the Star on Twitter. He is at Sam McDowell 11. Make sure you follow him. There should be, I'm anticipating you'll have some breaking news about the Chiefs here in the next week or two on personnel transactions.
Yeah. I would also encourage anybody I mean, Mark, you've got my email, but feel free to give everyone my email. Anybody that wants to reach out and share a connection or whatever, I'd love to do that. I mean, like I said, that's one of the things about this new job is trying to get used to the beats that I haven't been covering yet. And Mizzou's definitely one of them. Luckily, I do have the background of having attended there and knowing the history a little bit. But you asked about the coaching search. I'm interested in what everyone else thinks of stuff like that as well.
I want to ask you, wrap up, going from a beat writer to a columnist, do the negative feedback increase when you're doing an opinion piece?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My email inbox has become more difficult to keep up with for sure. So that's definitely part of, it's interesting you mentioned that because when I interviewed for the job, that was one of the things my boss mentioned. He's like, you need to prepare that this is going to be part of the job now. And for better or for worse, Twitter, I think, has prepared me for that. You can't send out a tweet without somebody finding something wrong with it, and you just eventually have to learn to ignore it. So I think that has prepared me a little bit for it.
Which column have you got the most pushback on so far?
A couple of them. So I wrote one of my first ones. I wrote about the social media hate that Patrick Mahomes' family received, and I got a lot of pushback on that one. And then I wrote one about Bill Self and Bruce Weber. And Mark, you were there, but I mean, Bruce Weber kind of took a shot at Bill Self's program without mentioning him by name, of course,
Right.
on his way out. And I kind of interpreted that and asked Bill about it the next day, and read between the lines a little bit on the lack of depth to his compliment to Bruce on the way out. And what's funny about that one is K-State fans and KU fans didn't weren't crazy about it, which I thought meant I maybe landed somewhere in the middle.
That means you were perfect. So.
Exactly. Right.
Bob Costas told me one time years ago, he was doing a playoff game with the Blue Jays and the Royals, and he got criticism from both sides that he was favoring the other team. And he said, if I got that, then I was doing a good job. So I thought your deal on the Mahomes family members was really good, because social media can be a cesspool. And anyway, I won't pontificate on that today. So Sam, thank you. It was great to have you. Keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll talk to you in person next time.
Yeah. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Sam McDowell, Kansas City Star columnist. Next week, we will have our old buddy, Jarrett Sutton, Tiger Club board member, former Mizzou player and NBA scout, and really look forward to talking to him about some basketball. And then in 2 weeks will be our last Zoom call for this fiscal year, and we will have Blair Kerkhoff from the Star. We welcome back Blair. He's been battling some illness, but he, I think, is getting healthy, and we look forward to talking to him. So everybody have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.